much for coming back and for joining us, for those of you who are joining us for the first time. And welcome back to my colleagues from SPIR who bunked off yesterday to go to their away day, and I hear might have had quite a good night last night, which is nice. So welcome again to Queen Mary University of London, to the Mile End Institute Queen Mary Centre for Politics, Policy and Public Life. I realise actually I haven't been plugging MEI enough, but we have our first event coming up next week for those of you who are in London, and Michael Cockrell's coming to talk about his life and work. So do join us for that. I'm Lyndsey Jenkins, I'm one of the Deputy Directors at the Centre. I'm a Labour-Hume Early Career Fellow in the School of History, and my research is on Labour women MPs in the post-war period. So, tiny announcements just for those of you who've not been here before, and then slightly more complicated programmatic changes. There are no students today, there's no fancy stuff, there's no so there's just full academia, intellectual, good chat, making friends with your colleagues, so just much different vibe today. If you need to lie down, that's absolutely fine, I definitely do. No fire alarms expected, so please go outside if you do. Tea and coffee keeps coming, and then there's the 2 cafes. The students are coming back in force today, so there'll be kind of loads and loads around. Loos are upstairs on the first floor or the second floor if you need those, and if you need to use the lift, you'll see it's got a kind of fancy panel that you need to use before you get in it, rather than the sensible thing of pressing the button when you get inside. We'll be in this room for most of the time, so if you're joining late, please go in through the back door, and that sort of minimises disruption. I think our special babies aren't here today, which is very sad, but if anybody does need to use the breastfeeding facilities, parenting room for any reason, we'll swipe you in, so just let me know. And then our ambassadors, I think, are all outside, but they've done a fantastic job, and they'll be going around with microphones, so do wait for those if you want to ask questions, and for those of you who've not been here for the past couple of days, just introduce yourself so you become formally part of the gang. Right, programme changes, which I will say again at the end of this session. Because one of our colleagues is unable to join us, we've sort of made a couple of last-minute changes. So Anne Locker is going to join the panel session in here on the changing nature of Parliament. So Michaela, I will send you Anne's biography. And Grace Heaton is going to join your session, Richard. And again, I'll send you her biography so you can introduce her. The other thing to note about that is that the session that was going to be in GC 201, which is Richard's session on political parties and cultures, is going to be in 101 because we had a bit of a technical hitch yesterday. So I'll reiterate that after our first session, just so you're all going to the right place. And Michaela and Richard can go to about past, so that we've got time to accommodate the new sessions, but still get to eat. I will say it again, if I remember it. And it's actually my real pleasure to introduce the next session, particularly because Sofia, until Monday, worked at Royal Holloway University of London, but has just joined Queen Mary, so it's really nice to have her as her kind of first public lecture as a Queen Mary scholar. So I will hand over to Sofia and to Minna to get the day going. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm hoping that works. It's the first time I've been mic'd up, so I'd like to thank you all for coming to this session. We're looking at women's political careers in Britain and around the world, so I think this is the only comparative one, is that right, the conference? I'd like to thank the Mile End Institute for having us. I'm sure everyone has said this, but it feels like a particularly poignant moment to be discussing and exploring women in British politics. Now, just to introduce us, I'm Minna Cowper-Coles. I'm a research fellow at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, and this is Sofia. She's about to be a lecturer in comparative politics at Queen Mary, and she's an expert in women in electoral politics, but with a special focus on violence against women in politics. Sofia has been writing a report on women's political careers in collaboration with the Global Institute for Women's Leadership and Women Political Leaders. And it's based on a survey of women in politics around the world. I'm going to ask Sofia to tell us about her report to start with, and then we're going to have some questions from you. That's all right? Okay, thank you, Sofia.
Thank you very much.
It's always interesting to have a microphone. I always feel very conscious about my voice when I have one, and I think my students notice that sometimes. So, thank you very much for being with me here today. I am very much looking forward to present you for the first time a report that we have been writing in collaboration, as Minna was mentioning, with the Global Institute for Women Leadership, but also with the Women Political Leaders Global Forum. And this has been a very challenging piece of work, but also something that has been spanning over almost a year now. So it has allowed us to look at research from a different perspective, but also to reflect on recent events and how they might or might not be explained by what happened in some other places, but also to try to identify common trends in the challenges that women face to really fulfill, have a fulfilling and productive career in public life. So I am going to try to present today 5 key points, and to convince you and persuade you that these points really are whole based on the data that we got. So the first one I want to make is that women are diverse in their backgrounds and ideology. And I think this is a key point to make today, because normally when we think about women, we might, or research that is being done about women in politics, sometimes, with some exceptions, of course, for example, Sarah here present, we think about women as being a monolithic group that face similar challenges, similar aims, but also that want similar things when they are representatives. However, we need to recognize that there is a diversity of women, that not all of them want the same thing, but also that they don't all of them experience or have the same experiences. So it's important to celebrate this diversity among different types of women who are participating in politics. The second is that women face, unfortunately, very heavy workloads, as they are still devoting much time to parliamentary duties, but also to family and other caring responsibilities. And this has been key, especially during the COVID pandemic. The third point is that family life is still something that women leaders cherish, and they really try very strongly to protect. And they struggle when they have multiple interests, but also a very demanding job like a parliamentarian job, if they don't have around them the social and institutional and social structures to help them thrive. The fourth point is that violence against women in politics is a widespread phenomenon that responds to different logics, but also that is expressed in different forms. And I think, as Minna was mentioning, this is where my most current research has been focused on. So for me, this is a very important point to make, also to show that, there might be some myths here, and that maybe we can discuss a little bit more about what can be done in this respect internationally. And the fifth point is that there are limited institutional mechanisms to facilitate career advancement for women. And regardless of how much discussion there has been about some things that work, now we know that they have been very slow to be implemented in certain places, and that maybe we can also think about more creative interventions to help women formally and informally to advance in their career. Now, how am I going to be doing this? So I'm going to be presenting data from a survey. It's a global survey that we sent to women legislators around the world. And if there is any quantitative researcher here in the room, you might be asking why only women and not to compare them against men. So first of all, is because that's the aim and the scope of the report, just to look across women, but also because, as I was mentioning before, at this stage we are not interested to say that women in comparison to men are more or less likely to suffer of certain barriers or to have certain barriers. What we want to see really is what are the common trends across different types of women. So that's why we are focusing exclusively on women. And that also, I have to say, that narrows a little bit the kind of conclusions we might reach at the end. Now, the survey was on the field between August 2021 and January 2022, so it's about 1 year. Don't think that we were opening, the answers all the time, like this was not really running all the year long, but we sent several reminders to around 2,346 women who are in parliaments around the world. And we received 307 anonymous answers, which represents a total of 13% response rate, which you might think, oh really, from so many people contacted, then we have so many few answers. But I have to say that having something with a response rate above 10% when you are interviewing or surveying political elites is actually a huge success. It sounds very, not for me to drop my own. But response rate varies, of course, across countries, and we have countries that are more represented than others. However, I want to mention here that in this survey, we do include women in politics, British women in politics. So, on a way, the experiences of British women in politics are also captured here in the survey. You also need to bear in mind that not all questions have the same response rate, and sometimes, if I want to draw more inferences, the low number of answers will make it complicated. So, just to tell you a little bit about the limitations of the study. And of course, as I was mentioning, we are really interviewing people that are, people that are very, very busy. So the fact that they are, and the question of, even though we try to stream it to the very minimum and to make it quick, of course, it requires them sometimes. So we are relying here on the generosity of our respondents, who were not in any way compensated by the time that they participated. So who are women? First point, women are diverse in their trajectory, background, experiences, and interest. And here I want to mention that the average age in the survey is 51 years old, which in totally I don't think is, we are seeing elderly women as we see mainly, or we might think about elderly men in politics in the same way. However, it's important to stress the fact that 51 years old, as an average, have two implications. First of all, is that women are indeed significantly older than the average women in the world, if we think about this world survey. Of course, there are variations in the mean age across countries. However, we recognize that 51 years old is slightly on the more older side. But also make us reflect about what a 51 years old women have or have not. Basically, the majority of them, they are not on the age to have kids, so we can presume that they start their political careers, or they are now at this stage when they don't have to care for little ones anymore. So 17% indicated that they belong to an ethnic minority in their country, which I want to say is also very important because, of course, who is an ethnic minority varies a lot across different parts of the world, right? So the fact that we have 17% of women that represent or that respond who come from minority groups in their home country is important because of representation. And 63% of them hold a higher education degree. What we see here is that women in politics tend to be highly educated, and we see that they have either PhDs or masters. But the fact that 60% of them also talk about the kind of educational gap, because we know that the majority of the population as well do not have masters or PhDs. So here we can also see that women tend to be highly prepared. And 30% of them go to church at least once a month, which is interesting because we also, when we analyze diversity, we see that the women in the sample also come from countries that are religious, but still they don't tend to be the most religious people of the country. So that's interesting. Now, 60% of them are married, and this is interesting, I think, because being married, a 51-year-old woman who is not on the age of have little ones or to have kids or bear kids. However, they are still married or at least living in a civil partnership with someone. this also, I want to stress this point also because it reflects on the importance that family networks have for women in politics. So bear this in mind. And on average, they have 2 kids. And when we ask them about the average age for the kids, they are older than 15 years old, which also indicates how, women might also wait a little bit to enter a political career, which is something that research has found out, that maybe women start slightly late because they, like having kids, etc., interrupt their career, or basically encourage them to push it for later. So, family ties. This is, I think, it's very important. So family ties end up being really crucial in a women's, in this survey. So 43% of them have a father or a father that is active in politics, and so their father that is active in politics, that also, or that is also in parliament, or that have been active in politics. And 36% have a mother who is also active in politics. And of course, we are seeing a difference here, given the fact that in many countries, women only started to be active in politics until more recently than men. So here as well, we see some variation across countries in the world, but we also ask them about whether they have a grandfather in politics, and basically I have to say that I was surprised to see that it was not different in different areas of the world. So it's something that happens in Europe, it's something that happens in Asia, in African countries, and North America. So we don't see differences here, which basically stresses the fact of doing more research on political dynasties, and not to focus on political dynasties exclusively in new democracies or autocratic regimes, but also that we start to think about political dynasties in long-established democracies. So if we think about the role of power, we see that 44% of them indicated that regional or local party officials or branches are responsible for the election of candidates, and 66% of them were encouraged by a party official. Meanwhile, 63% were encouraged by a representative of a women's group. So here we can see how things converge. So a lot of the women in the sample, they have a previous career in local politics, because they need to get to know the local structures of the party to be able to be selected. And we know already that women need to be, this is very well established research, that encouraging women to stand for office is a key factor to trigger their expressive political ambition. Who is more likely to trigger this expressive political ambition? When a national party official come and actually look actively in the local level for these women that might be potential candidates. But also the key role that women's group play here. So the fact that a women's group comes and can encourage a local candidate or a local politician to say, well, you can do more, you can really expand your progress in your career and go to national level politics, becomes a key thing in encouraging women. So we also see that they come from a mixed professional background. It's no surprise, because there is research as well that have shown that in general we don't draw from the whole pool of professions when we see candidates, but that there are certain professions that are more likely to render candidates than others. And we all are familiar, or I guess we are, with this research that says that lawyers are more likely to stand for office. However, what we see here is that it's a minority, so only 11% have had a legal profession before, 10% have been in civil service, and 67% have been occupying a high-level leadership of management position. So in general, again, women tend to come from backgrounds that are highly experienced, that are highly professionalized, either in management, but also if we combine this with the finding that the majority of them are highly educated, here we can see the pressure for women to really have a long-term career, but also to be over-prepared, or not over, but very, very prepared, well prepared for the role. So on average, they have around 10 years of party membership before elected, so they tend to be quite senior. And something that I find is interesting is that campaigns are very long-term. And a lot of the women in the sample have been saying that regardless of the fact that campaigns might be official, for example, I don't know, in the UK and in Europe, the official period of campaign is around like 1 to 4 months. A lot of women in the sample express that they have been campaigning for more than 12 months, sometimes even informally. Now, here we might think that if it's an informal campaign that they have to conduct for over 12 months, how much more help they need to fulfill also their caring roles, to juggle family and other commitments, and also how expensive the campaigns can become very, very quickly. So here is another interesting point that emerged from the report about the role of media coverage, and I am sure that we are all familiar with these discussions about how the media cover women in positions of leadership in a very gendered manner. I found it interesting that 90% of them say that the media mention their party affiliation half of the time or more, which is interesting because women are starting to see, this indicates that women women candidates have are also being put next to the label, and that the parties that they stand for become also very relevant in their campaigns. 10% mention their race, but considering that we only have 17% of the sample being from an ethnic minority, this might not be very interesting. 8% mentions the class background, which I think is interesting because it might also mean that we are just giving it for granted, or that because a lot of women in the sample already have family ties in politics and are already immersed on this, might not need the explicit mention of the family. 15% of the cases mention physical appearance, which I think is interesting if we compare it with 79% of them who are of the coverage mentioning their policy instances. So this also, in my opinion, highlights the point that media scholars need to be looking more into detail about what we mean by sexist or gendered media coverage, that we might be rethinking about how media have been changing the coverage of women in politics, but also that this might be reflected that women in politics are becoming more of a, less of a rarity in their campaign. So that might be normalized, the fact that we are seeing women in public life. But it's still that they are being attached to issues. So if 79% of the times issues are mentioned, we need to think about how, if these issues are mentioned in a gendered way. So that maybe sexism and gendered media coverage is not as straightforward as we thought before, but start really looking at more in-depth trends. I'm not sure how well I'm doing in terms of time, but please, 5 minutes. Can you give me a sign for 5 minutes? In 5 minutes, so we also have information about how progressive their political ambition is. And here I want to highlight that 61% were incumbents in the next election, which is a good thing because it talks about seniority and also about experience. It's not like having new incomers is a bad thing, it's a very good thing, but if women are standing again, that means that we can capitalize on their seniority and their knowledge, but also on their capacity to mentor other women entering into politics in an efficient way. However, I find interesting that regardless of the fact that 61% were incumbents or are incumbents and have had on average party membership of 10 years, and they tend to be quite well prepared with a lot of experience, etc., we see that only 19% express the desire to have hold a ministerial position in the past, which means that women in the sample are highly educated, highly prepared, but at the same time that we might be seeing that they are not completely using their full capacity in their chambers. So this is, I think, interesting because it means that their career might not be as fulfilling, or that we might not be benefiting from, in our full potential, in the full potential there. So there might be potential here for improvement. And we can also see that only 42% of them would like to hold a ministerial post in the future. So I think is, so if we think about holding a ministerial post as the next step in their career, what we can see here is that probably the career of women in legislative chambers gets a point of stagnation. So they get elected, then they don't completely fulfill or unleash their full potential because they are super qualified, super well trained, but they don't hold ministerial posts, but also that might be discouraging them from looking at this type of positions in the future. So now a key question, women acting for women. I feel very reassured here because 94% of them feel some responsibility for representing the interest of women's interest as part of the role. So women really arrive to the legislative chamber already knowing that they are acting for women. Now, again, this highlights the importance of looking at the diversity of women. So who are they standing there and who they think they are representing? So I think the fact that they already come with this very strong sense of duty, if we want to call it like that, is interesting and just highlights how important this is. Now we ask them as well about, so if they think they are going to be acting for women, we ask them as well what are the kind of women's issues or what they consider to be women's issues. And they mention education, women's health, equality and diversity, and labor rights and finance and economics. So it's interesting that finance and economics come in the mix because they have been traditionally been seen as a very masculine role. However, I think women in politics have realized that real power comes with money, and that, you know, that it's important to get involved in this, in finance and economics as well. Interesting, more than half of them want to advocate what they consider women's issues. So there is a correlation between what they, you know, what they want to advocate and also what they consider to be women's issues. However, let's not forget that an overwhelming majority said that they are there to represent women's issues. So I find it interesting that, yeah, an overwhelming minority wants to represent women's issues. However, we see a discrepancy of, you know, what issues they are interested in advocating and what issues they really get involved into. So now, very quickly, obstacles for representation. 38% of them consider that gender has positively impacted their effectiveness as a parliamentarian. However, this is presented in a very positive tone. We can think about the very large proportion of women that think that gender have actually not impacted positively their effectiveness. And we might think here about, you know, how gender might impose a different, gendered and gendered roles might impose extra barriers. So some obstacles to their career progression or why they might think this way. One of them is concerns about keeping the family life private. So women care a lot about privacy and they think that a career in politics might put this in risk. Also the fact that elections take away time from family, as I was mentioning before, if they have these very long informal campaigns, then of course there is some tension there. They also express very high concerns about harassment, abuse and intimidation, but I'm going to talk about this more in detail in a second. And not being taken seriously, it also comes very high on the list of concerns. And about 65% talk about the negative effect of COVID in their careers. However, we ask them if COVID had a negative effect in their careers. Very high proportion say yes, but these do not have any significant impact or effect on their willingness to stand for office again. And I think this is interesting because then we analyze open-ended questions to ask, okay, why is then that COVID have impacted negatively? And it's the workload. So the fact that they already have a very heavy workload, and this was, of course, unevenly distributed during the pandemic, and apparently I'm not original in saying that women really took the heavier load there. On the positive side, they also mentioned that COVID gave the opportunity to have virtual meetings, and that for a lot of them that reduced the time of commute and also allowed them to better juggle a political career with family life, which I think opens the door for new arrangements and new perhaps things of thinking about how can we have use technology to better enable women in politics. Lack of institutional support was also mentioned. So a lot of them mentioned how important having a women's caucus or mentoring, formal mentoring, how important it was to have this type of structure around to help them progress their career, but also to think strategically about the career. So they highlight the role of mentoring very often in the sample. However, only 28% have access to a formal mentoring program or or support that is formally and institutionalized. So again, how much are we missing here? How much expertise are we missing? And how can we better encourage senior women in politics to help others? If we look at party rules for representation, we see that the majority of women in the sample say that their parties have formal rules to balance gender representation, so 63%. However, these formal rules to balance representation do not really translate into formal programs once they are in the legislative chamber. I find it interesting if we think a little bit in terms of intersectionality to look at formal rules to encourage ethnic representation and how the majority of the rules to encourage ethnic representation are informal, while the majority of rules to encourage gender representation are formal. So it's not only the proportion here, it's also the institutional support. A bit about harassment, abuse and intimidation. So we see that women feel on average safe when they are in politics, when 0 means very safe and 10 means very unsafe. However, we see variation across different regions. So with women in Oceania and Asia feel less safe with a mean of 5.8. I think this is very important because feelings of safety shape behavior, and because women are already mentioning harassment, abuse and intimidation as a reason not to stand for office. This is something that the scholars in the field have for a very long time been trying to unpack. However, regardless of a lot of international initiatives to tackle this issue, we are only seeing that this is getting worse. 89% of them said that they have been experiencing degrading talk. But also 72% of them said that the intention was political. So we might be seeing here that it's not only violence against women in politics, but also some indication of gendered political violence when women are targeted, but also when women are targeted because with the intention to prevent them from participating. So 85% of them receive abusive or intimidatory comments on social media, which highlights the role that social media companies have on shaping this. Interestingly, a lot of the people in the sample, 54% experienced threats to harm, which is something that is similar to what we are observing in local politics in long-established democracies. And luckily, a minor number, only 11% suffer psychological violence. Physical violence, sorry. So in conclusion, what I want to say today is, and I hope that I have provided you with information about it and some food for thought for the discussion. We see that women are diverse in their backgrounds, ideology, and their pathways to power, that they face heavy workloads, that we might have to think more creatively about how to better help them balance or have a work-life balance. They devote a lot of time to parliamentary duties, but also family commitments and long campaigns play a role here. And the family life is still something that is holding women back from unleashing their full potential. So how can we better encourage, or how can we better support women with caring duties, not only caring for children, but also perhaps for the elderly, partners, or have other kinds of caring responsibilities to participate. Violence against women in politics is unfortunately widespread, and current initiatives are not being sufficient. And finally, that we need to start thinking about other institutional mechanisms to help them progress in their career, but also that we need to think creatively about intersectionality and to help more formally here, given how important these formal mentorship programs have been for women who have succeed in their careers. And it's worrying, I think, that we know that something is important, but still we fail to institutionally implement it. So I hope this was interesting. Now we are very open to have a discussion, a debate, and also some Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sofia. Do we come and sit?
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions? Maybe I could. Oh, hi.
Sorry, we're just
I think you should wait patiently for a second. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It's a really fascinating study. I was just wondering if you looked at women's class backgrounds and how you found that impacted women's experiences in their careers.
Okay. Measuring class in a comparative study is very difficult because how class is measured in the UK is very different from how is it measured in other places. So we cannot ask them about that specifically, and the instruments need to take this into account. So we opted for, instead of asking about class, to ask for educational background and previous careers, or where was the background. So we know that, for example, lawyers tend to be, have a higher, to be higher up in the social economic scale. We know that if women that are highly educated more likely have had the resources to be highly educated, and that will basically talks or indirectly tell us about what is the type of women that we are seeing in those regards. Also family ties. So if the family ties are strong, and we know that this idea of family, the dynastic political families, then we can also think about the fact that they are very well networked. So we think that that covers different aspects of class. So education, kind of a proxy for income or previous income, and a proxy for, social capital in the size of networks.
Hi, can you give any more detail about how you broke down occupational background?
Yes, so at the end we used whether they have been, I only presented the top things that they have done, or the top results, but we asked them for being in the legal profession, being part of the civil service. We also asked them if they have not had any professional background before, so if they were staying at home or doing something else. We asked them as well if they have a background in any agriculture or provision of, producing food. We also asked them if they have been in a position like providing or working in services, but also if they have been in management. So management in terms of managing a company, and how high up on the level of seniority they were on these type of companies. So those are from the top of my mind what I remember were included. But also we included things like being a low-skilled worker.
Just from a personal research interest, I think there's a gap where we don't know anything about women who've been in science, coming from the scientific professions. And there's a lot of, this is something that sometimes comes up about the lack of scientific expertise in the commons as opposed to the laws. And I think that could be something that could be included in future studies to try and gauge that.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned that, this is very interesting. In the UK survey that we do among candidates and representatives, what we include is previous academic jobs. But you're right, because previous academic jobs don't necessarily mean that they have been in science. And a way to refine that can be to also ask if they have been in STEAM, for example, or on the social sciences. So that's a very good suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I thought there was some really interesting information there. I noticed the statistic about women having an average of 2 children, and I'm guessing that's assuming women who didn't have any children at all. And I was just wondering if there were many women who didn't have children, and if they gave the reasons for why they didn't. Were they made to feel that they had to sacrifice having a family life to succeed in politics, for example?
Yeah, so a lot of them, on average they come as 2 kids, but we also ask them if they have no kids. And so we see a normal distribution around that, so that the majority are there. But it's true that a lot of them said no, and it will be interesting to look at that with age. So whether women in the sample that say that they don't have kids are also slightly older, so they push their career, or if they are younger, so not having kids was an enabler somehow, or they might be even in some countries paying a penalty for not having kids. Because this idea of women being part of a family life and being able to juggle everything is also part of the gender stereotypes that women in politics need to face, and that there is a penalty for not having them. Especially in very patriarchal societies, when this can be seen as you do not know what the interests of women are because you don't have kids. That might be putting forward for thinking, okay, maybe I don't have kids precisely because I know, that they said, or because there are certain groups of women who don't want to have kids that also need to be represented. But, there is a lot of things to untease there. And I also think it's very interesting.
Thanks for a really interesting presentation. I have a quick question about method, which you may have addressed, so apologies, but in the response rate, does that vary by world region? And does that factor into how you analyse this data? And then I have a question about this diversity in backgrounds and ideology and what women's views are considered. There is some research on the Commons that suggests that before 1997, women's issues raised in Parliament are quite narrowly defined. So women MPs talk about a narrow range of issues. But after 97, when the number increases significantly, the range of issues they talk about diversifies significantly. Lyndsey knows more about this than I do. So I wonder if there are implications from your research that can be connected to that research about the more women you have, the more things they're going to talk about.
That's very interesting. We cannot say that much about that because we don't have a time series, and also because what might be considered as a woman. So I presented the top things. I found it interesting that in some countries security came as a women's issue, and when I look at the open-ended questions, so I have to say that doing survey data sometimes is kind of weird because you look at numbers, right? As you are crossing, but then when you look at the open-ended questions, things become fascinating. So when I started to look at who might be more likely to say, security or safety is a concern, then I went to look at the open-ended answers. And I was very shocked by saying that some of them were saying that their main concern is to fight against the Taliban. So it tells you about, how diverse the group is as well. In other places like Latin America, for example, they were mentioning that security was a key concern for women, but because feminicides in Latin America have been growing in the past 10 years. So I thought that, we might think about this strategically as something that has changed over time, but also that something that is very contextual and talks a lot about what are the pressing issues that women face in every country. And the other question that you mentioned was about the response rate.
Yeah, and how it varies by world region. Is there more from Europe? More from
so we don't find significant differences across different parts of the world in terms of response rate. There are variations, but the numbers are very low, so they don't come as significant. I have to say that women in politics in the UK are amazing. They do like to answer surveys. And that's really, that's great. I love it.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Sofia. That was really interesting, and I hope provided some food for thought for the rest of the conference and some comparisons to women across the world. So perhaps we could all just give a
Thank you very much, Minna, and thank you for